The E7 has a quarter of the world's Muslim population at 474 million. So already the influence of a Muslim population is dramatically portrayed in this change of power, which takes place around about 2019. What does that mean in terms of economic activity? If you look at this chart and we're deciding where you would do business, would you do business in Europe or would you do business in Asia? Would you start a new business in Europe, North America or Asia if you were thinking about what markets and numbers of consumers you wanted to address? I'm quite sure you'd rather address 5 billion consumers in Asia versus 650 million in crowded, competitive, highly regulated markets of Europe and North America. It's an interesting choice. The bottom line, of course, is that the United States and Europe's markets are still $17 trillion of economic activity, whereas China and Japan, the Asian countries without Japan are still only a third of that at $5.5 trillion US. The really interesting issue here is that China has the potential to increase by 50% its consumption. That doesn't exist in the United States and it doesn't exist in Europe. And if you're looking after pursuing new money that hasn't already been committed by families or companies, then the place to go is where new money is emerging and influencing those consumers and markets to spend money with you. What does that mean to us also in the way we live? There's a dramatic change happening in the world, and we're past the cutover point where more people in the world were living in cities than in the country last year. And now we're forecast to have around about 70% of the world's population living in cities. And when we live in cities, the work we do, how we consume, our attitudes, our behaviours, and our values all change. And there's more in common between citizens of some of the largest cities in the world than there are between citizens of the same country living in a rural environment and their cities. And it has a dramatic influence on how you go about doing your business, how you approach people, what your language is, and what your values are to them. Thinking of the largest growth cities in the world, some of the largest are in China and Vietnam at 6% per annum growth, which is staggering growth for urban economies. But also these in the Muslim majority countries are growing at 5 and 4%. So there's enormous growth and potential and urbanisation going on in these. Many of them are sub-Saharan African countries, and we'll come back to that issue in a moment because there's quite a bit of change happening there. So, what opportunity does that present itself in terms of a global population shifting? The world's short about $40 trillion US of infrastructure. So if you're in business in any way, shape or form with buildings, roads, electricities, water supply, transportation, then there's $40 trillion US of infrastructure required, and 15 trillion of that is in Asia and Pacific region. There's a dramatic requirement for infrastructure in the built environment to house that population and to provide services for that population. So that's about the environment and the structure and the politics. Let's think a little bit more now about the people. The world's population pretty much stayed the same until 1955. And in 1955, broadly speaking, we stopped dying. Now that's quite good news for us, but what it does to the population is that red line. When you see a line like that, it's either someone making a proposal for investment, and that's their promise of sales return in the future, or it's actually what the population of planet Earth is doing right now. And we're halfway up through an explosive growth in global population. Okay, this I understand that. But what's more important is halfway up that slope this year we'll have the 7 billionth person to be alive at the same time on this planet. And we've never had that in the history of Earth. And therefore we have no idea really how it's going to work out. And we're moving quite rapidly through 8 to 9 billion. Another 2 billion people are yet to arrive, and we will increase the population accordingly. But very interestingly, of course, that great population boom is in the emerging, the developing economies. And therefore it leaves the established economies quite static in terms of dynamism, numbers of consumers, the capacity for work, and expansion of economies. All of the opportunities outside of the established economies. So what does that mean from a Muslim population? If you think about the growth over the next 20 years only, it's 1.3 billion extra people are going to be staying alive on the planet. Half of that population, just about at 600 million, will be born in Muslim countries. So half of the new growth is likely to come from Muslim countries. We're around about 23% of world population, moving to 26%, and potentially through 2050 and 2100, moving to over a third of the world's population being Muslim. I think we heard yesterday the comment about the Muslim population being the 3rd billion. I believe its potential to be significantly higher than a single billion, possibly 2 and even 3 billion out of a 9 billion cohort. A third of the world, 3 billion people, larger than China, larger than India, larger than China and India combined, in fact, in terms of forecasts for those countries in terms of populations. And probably if you're in the business of thinking about making money or running your company, the growth of the economies of the population is likely to move from 2.7 trillion to 10 trillion. And that's quite a conservative estimate in terms of the economic activity of those populations.